What up, y'all? This is your Don Israel coming to you live from Lit, asking y'all to subscribe to the channel. So make sure y'all subscribed, make sure y'all liking the videos, make sure y'all commenting, and make sure you turn on your notifications that let you know when new videos are dropping. We're dropping them daily, and you want to be on it because we on it, all right? So keep it lit, keep it locked, subscribe, we out. Marduce is a dream. What's going on, y'all? It's your boy, your Don Israel, a.k.a. Liddy Fontaine, back again with another episode of Lit, the premier platform for all things literary, swaggy, and everything in between. Today's guest is my man, Jess Row, who I first met almost over 2 years ago at the New School, and he was talking his shit, and I challenged him on his shit, and since then we became friends.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about what that friendship is, what his writing is about, and just everything else we could chop it up about. So thank you, Jess, for pulling up.
Thank you for inviting me.
So the first thing we got to do, I don't know if you know the episodes or anything like that, the rundown, but we do the swag.
Yeah.
The swag cam. So I need you to stand up and curate the swag for us. How are we doing? Top to bottom, bottom to top. What do we? Okay. Around. Okay. Yeah. So where are we starting? Curate.
Where are we starting?
Let's start with the shoes.
Let's start with the shoes.
Okay.
I just got these yesterday.
Ooh, what's those?
They're Nike Air Sock Fly Racers.
Okay.
Yeah. I saw these in Kith on Bleecker Street.
Oh man, he kiffed up. I like that.
And I actually didn't get them there, but I saw them there. I was inspired.
Yeah.
And I've been looking for a shoe like this that you can wear without socks because I really hate socks.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy with these.
All right.
They're so comfortable.
What about these jeans?
Uniqlo.
Okay.
I love Uniqlo because they do free alterations in the store.
Oh, they do?
And as a 5'5" man, everything I buy has to be altered.
It has to be altered.
So they do free alterations, and plus I love their stuff. It lasts a long time.
Mm-hmm.
The price is right.
The price is right.
Yeah.
Let's hit me with this. This is why we need the soundboard.
So
the blazer.
The blazer. The blazer. This is from Muji.
Oh. Okay.
And it weighs about 3 ounces or something.
I have no idea what that means, but okay.
That
means it's light?
It's extremely light.
Okay.
And it basically doesn't wrinkle at all. It's like the perfect thing for traveling or just whatever. It basically it's like nothing on your body. It's so for like a hot day like today.
Mm.
It's awesome. This is like my favorite garment.
Cool.
I don't think Muji makes them exactly like this anymore, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
That's a one of none right now.
It's a one of none.
And then the shirt.
So
pop the shirt. You gotta see the shirt. You gotta see the full effect.
So I'm a white guy with a beard who likes hiking and stuff. So I have a lot of North Face. I like North Face, but I love Ghostface Killer.
Right.
So I saw this online. It
brings
the two together.
It's all the loves together.
Yeah, exactly.
The intersection of the swag.
Exactly.
I love it. All right. So, as you know, or you may not know, the Marduce is the literary equivalent of the gin and juice. So it's 3 parts Martinelli's, 1 part Douce, all parts delicious.
Okay.
So we're gonna partake in that. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna pop your top and you're gonna drink to the leaves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Drink to the leaves.
Yeah. So you're gonna cheers.
Cheers. To lit.
We will. Got my little adjunct of money, so I could afford to pour a little bit more.
Oh.
Yeah, you drank, goddamn, Jess.
I'm thirsty. It's hot out there.
No, yeah.
That means I'm getting totally hammered.
Yes.
On that. This is Douce? Is that what
yeah.
This is
Jay-Z's liquor.
This is Jigga's
liquor.
Jigga's liquor of choice.
Yeah.
I think we have to taste again.
Yeah, we do.
To 444.
Right on.
It's a pretty good album.
You said pretty good, man. Come on.
That's good.
What happened?
That's good.
Yeah. Thank you. So,
wow.
Let's get into it, man. Wrote one of.
You get some of that.
You wrote one of, in my eyes, one of the most intellectually responsible books about race.
Okay.
That's the best way I could frame it. I think we've had so many conversations about this book that I have to find a new way to talk about it for people who ain't privy to the conversation. But the premise of this book is a Jewish white man goes to China, gets racial reassignment surgery. Thailand, my bad. Thailand gets racial reassignment surgery as a black man. But what's I always found fascinating about the book was that, not always, I'm not going to say that. I was kind of like, who does white man think he is writing about black people? But what this book is actually about is about why this man no longer wants to be white instead of why this man is trying to be black. So it does that James Baldwin thing of, instead of, you know, when he said he went to, it's not that he was going to Paris, he was just trying to get away from America. And I saw that relationship that this man Martin is not trying to be black, he's not trying to be white. And to me, that was the central question of the novel, which is like very interesting because I had never thought about a novel as an essay. And so I want to give the people just the mind of Jess Row as it pertains to this novel.
This is what are the kind of thinking that I've been working on and dwelling on for my whole career. And it started with my first book, which is called A Train to Lo Wu, about the 2 years I spent in Hong Kong. And a lot of that book is also really a book about race in a different way. It's about Hong Kong being a place where many people come to and they feel they don't belong, and they feel the sense of like slippage between where they came from and where they are now. It's a place of a lot of plural identities. Even Hong Kong Chinese people have a kind of plural identity because they're Hong Kong people, they're Chinese people. Many of them have passports or citizenships or family overseas. It's that kind of a place, you know, that sort of like New York is a place where many people come to, and even the people who are from there, their lives are just, you know, full of kind of intersecting avenues, just like the city itself.
I like that.
So that's been my fascination for my whole writing life, basically. And the older I get, and the more I sort of process this stuff, the further back into my own experience of whiteness it goes. Yeah. And so the more I see the more I look into my own past and my own reading I did as a kid, there's all this kind of feeling of indeterminacy and this sort of question that resounds over and over. What is whiteness?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be white?
Right.
What does it mean to be a white American? What does it mean to be a white American man? Where is the place that rests?
Yeah. And
for me, the thing is, there never is any place where it rests. And so that's the kind of existential.
And what do you mean by that? Like, there is no place where it rests?
Well, it's like, if just in terms of my own experience.
Yeah.
Like, I'll give you an example. It's something I've just been writing about in an essay. There was a time when I spent when I was about 10, 11 years old, when I spent some time hanging out with my cousins who were from South Dakota, where my father grew up. And these guys were like, they were from a rural area. They were from the West. And they were like, they had like mullets, and they were much older than I was. They were all in their 20s, early 20s. And, they had mullets, they drove Camaros, they were totally radical Republicans, they were really racist. They loved like Rambo and Mad Max and stuff like that. This is in the early 80s.
And that order.
And that kind of thing. And, they knew, like, all the lines from all the movies. And the time I spent hanging out with him was mostly, like, watching movies.
Yeah.
And so I got this, like, sort of curriculum from them of, like, this. Because, like, everything they thought about it was, like, Animal House, Rodney Dangerfield, all this stuff. So that was, like, for a while, and, like, this is about the time that, like, the movie Top Gun came out.
Oh, shit.
Like the planes and all that stuff. So like Tom Cruise, like that was, for just like a minute of my life, like that was what being a white American man was supposed to be. And I had this minute where I sort of bought into that.
So if you could boil that down, from Rodney Dangerfield to Top Gun and Camaro, what language would you give that living like that whiteness.
Yeah, it's really it's interesting. You know, I think like in the 80s at that time, this is like the Reagan era, post-Vietnam era. There was really the sense that like white maleness had been sort of like embarrassed, shut down, castrated by the failure of Vietnam, the women's movement, that sort of the oil embargo and all that stuff that had happened in the 70s. And there was really this feeling that like Reagan was coming in and he was like reestablishing like American manhood, like the Rambo thing.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about that is that, that's it. Like if you look at Rambo is like, first of all, he's one guy.
Yeah.
And it's all like reactive. He's like lashing out.
Yeah.
He's like striking back from a position of having been wounded.
Yeah.
So it's a sense of like this hyper assertive white masculinity that's all about like getting back what you took away from me.
Or getting back what was taken.
Yeah. Getting back what other people. Yeah. It's like, Clint Eastwood in the Dirty Harry movies or Charles Bronson in the Death Wish movies.
I've been watching so I went to go see It this weekend with a friend, and I was watching the trailers, and Bruce Willis was in some movie, Death Wish. They're bringing Death Wish back with Bruce. It's like you rehash.
Seriously?
Yes. So they're bringing like Death Wish back with Bruce Willis, which is very.
This is the time for it.
But it's weird because isn't Die Hard like Death Wish adjacent? Like isn't that like the more or less the same plot? But then you look at those
more technology.
Yeah,
more
but
stuff.
it's just like you think of like the Death Wishes, the Die Hards, the Lethal Weapons, the what else? The Taken.
RoboCop.
Yeah, like all these movies in which there's this white man whose family is messed with.
Yeah, yeah.
And so in the pursuit of justice,
right,
I'm going to do what the fuck I want.
Right.
And this is like the premise of it. And I started like, as I'm watching this, like the insidiousness of the narrative is like this, like white men believe. Like there was a movie with Michael Douglas. I don't know what the name of the movie
Falling
is.
Down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where he just like loses his shit and he's like, I'm tired of playing by the rules.
White man who loses his shit.
Yeah, and he's just like, I'm gonna start fucking shit up, start blowing shit up.
Yeah.
Like no one shoots him or nothing. Like he just goes throughout his whole day.
Right.
Just like everything was taken from me, thus I'm like reclaiming it.
Yeah.
And this is like the real narrative of all those movies, no matter what, is like
it's like Falling Down is like the culmination of all these movies.
Yeah.
But to me, I was thinking about this because I was thinking about in the context of working on this essay.
Yeah.
You can draw a straight line from Death Wish to the ad that Donald Trump put in the paper about the Central Park 5.
Oh shit.
He put this ad in the paper that basically said like these kids are monsters and they deserve to die and the city is in chaos. And so this is right around the time of the Central Park 5 in 1991. You can draw a straight line from Death Wish, which is late 70s, to his election. Because the rhetoric is the same. The country's out of control. What he said in his inaugural speech, like the carnage. He used the word carnage. So there's a sense of like, I am the one guy who's going to rescue you from like the carnage of this country that's out of control with all these
the white man's burden, like the Rudyard Kipling. Yeah. But that's what I mean is like what's interesting is like when I started watching those movies from a different perspective, which is like not assuming that like I'm the person, like I'm like, you watch John Wayne movies thinking you John Wayne. It's like, oh no, you're the Indian in this, you're the Native American in this, this dramatization.
Right.
And so I'm like, switching that view is like, oh, I'm supposed to root for my own death.
Yeah.
Which is very like, it kind of shifts the perspective. And then when the perspective is shifted, like that's what allowed me to see more about these movies. Like, Angela Flournoy had came and we were talking about like the insidiousness of police films and what they're really teaching us to normalize, which is like every police film, it's always a cop who goes not above and beyond the call of duty, but just like doesn't fucking listen at all. Like they're breaking rules, they're like detaining witnesses, putting them in the back of like the trunk and shit. And it's like all made in this way of like in the pursuit of justice. Like they could blow up houses, they could shoot people,
torture people.
At some point in old movies, especially buddy cop films, their badges get taken and they're like, we're gonna do this shit anyway, right? So the whole thing is like when you see this real, and then what I really started paying to was the parallel between like, wait, like this person was told not to do this and he did it anyway, right? And then what happens in the movies? Like the person who doesn't listen, what they get put on desk duty and they get put on like traffic patrol. Right. And that's supposed to be like emasculating to them. Like they're not a real cop.
That's right.
But it's like you still have your fucking job and then like someone lost their life. And so when I start to see like the real world mirroring of these fictitious plot lines, like the shit becomes too real. And like for that reason, like a lot of these movies, I'm like, I can't fuck with them no more. Like I watch them with a different sense of like, nah, this is not just a movie. This is like we're watching real life play itself out in this very like meta way.
Yeah. I mean, it would be fascinating to do a book on like the psychic life of police. You know, to do a project about like what is it that what are the stories that like police get told about themselves as police, because obviously like one of the stories they get told is the story of the person who goes like outside of the law.
Right.
That's like the Dirty Harry story that
you're
talking about. You know, but then there's it's fascinating. There's this amazing movie that almost nobody has seen from the late 90s called Copland with Sylvester Stallone as the main character.
Oh shit.
And he's like this wounded, injured, depressed New Jersey local cop in a town where everybody else is an NYPD policeman somewhere in North Jersey. And it's all about him like discovering the underside of what it means to be a cop, even though he like defies everybody and the whole sort of like culture of policing. It's fascinating. It came to mind because the poet Reginald Dwayne Betts, the poet and lawyer, and
he wrote that essay recently about getting like the trying to get the bar.
Yeah, exactly. So he's been posting a lot of stuff on Facebook about Bruce Springsteen and how he's never listened to Bruce Springsteen before, and he really connects to Bruce Springsteen. And he wrote about the album Nebraska, and that reminded me of how in the movie, in this movie Copland, Sylvester Stallone is this like wounded, depressed cop listening to that album over and over. It's this very like haunting. It's Bruce Springsteen just like playing the guitar and singing these really, really terrifying sad songs. I was thinking like, you know, what is the like, you know, there's like obviously like a wounded, emasculated side to being a policeman, but what is it? You know, like what is the like psychic life there? Because if you think about like the cases like Michael Garner, or Eric Garner. Michael Brown.
Yeah.
These cases, you know, ultimately it's about some individual. You know, a lot of it is like systemic practices.
Right.
But there's also this moment where like one individual does something, you know, that is a distinct decision to kill somebody.
No, yeah.
And so like, you know, and the forces of the legal process, the grand juries and all that, really militate against ever understanding like what was happening, what was the psychic process that led that policeman to kill that person.
Right, because the onus of the process is not to try to figure out why the person was killed. The onus is on the person of why was the person killable.
Right.
Right. Like
right.
what? Like what was he? You know, like
right,
thinking
right.
about like I was at the event on Tuesday at the Schomburg, and Claudia Rankin had said the thing about like Darren Wilson saying he was scared. Mm-hmm. She's like, I believe him, but why was he scared?
Well, right, and that's
right.
Exactly
what is actually the fear? And it's like we don't really, as a culture.
Yeah.
You know, I don't mean we like as an individual thing, because it's like I think for myself, I know what informs that fear. I think is one of like the refusal to admit that the fear is real for a lot of people who claim they don't have it, which is, I think what happens a lot in this book is like you address a lot of those fears. And I think, you know, that fear of feeling like you don't have power and only coming into that awareness when the fear is present, right? Mm-hmm. So you deny this fear your whole life, and this is when it's like systematic racism plays its part, because this, like our country and the way our society is structured, is done so much to like remove the fear, like carting off like zip codes and making sure you don't see people of color in these real ways. And so now so much of this fear that you feel isn't real becomes real to you in the moment that you have to address it. And so the killing of that person is in that person's mind, like the killing of a person of color,
Yeah.
in the white person's mind is killing the fear, but it's like that's not the fear.
Mm-hmm.
So in your mind, like, you know, it's like those horror movies, right? And like all these genres of films that we have in America that are so poignant for reasons beyond like the popularity of them, is like I'm forced to like really study them. And like what's one of the themes of horror is that no matter how much you kill the thing, it comes back, right?
That's right.
Like the fear is never, you know.
It's like the thing to be feared is always there. It's like always still there.
Right. And but the thing about it, right, was like the fear is like it's actually something that's in you and not in the other person. Mm-hmm. So like transitioning to the book, or just bringing the book into conversation, what we're talking about is you talk about whiteness as an in-body experience as opposed to an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, which is really important.
Yeah.
It's really important to, you know, think about that as a, you know, as a moment-to-moment lived experience.
Yeah.
There's something that Toni Morrison says in the beginning of Playing in the Dark is that white writers and black writers, all writers to some extent, you know, understand that their stories are taking place in a racialized universe. It's just a matter of wanting to admit that to yourself out loud or not. Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways, like the experience of whiteness is so often kind of subliminal or just below the surface, not named, not narrated. That it takes time and practice to name it and narrate it. Yeah. But it's not that it's not there. Right. You know, what's subliminal is still, still exists.
And so I think the question of all writing and the question of all art, like the question of living, is a matter of risk, right? Mm-hmm. And safety and danger. Mm-hmm. And I remember one of the things you had said about this, one of the immediate things you was told was that you do not want the type of danger and the risk and the trouble that comes with this book.
That's right.
So then what became your reasoning for going like, well, I'm going to do it anyway?
It was really just a sense that I really wanted to write a novel, and this was the novel I had in me to write at that particular moment.
So really describe that moment. Like where is Jess Row? Like now we're talking about like real life. What does the real life look like at that time?
So this was in, what year was this? This is in 2011, I think, or 2010.
Okay.
And basically I had switched agents. I had one agent for about 8 years. Mm-hmm. And we had gone through this whole thing where I had to break one contract with a publisher, and I've been working on this novel for a long time that was like this very slow-paced, very complicated historical novel. And I was really realizing that it wasn't working, but I was really frustrated, and my agent wasn't really being helpful. She was really frustrated. And the whole thing was like, it was the whole process had gone on too long, and I realized I needed to kind of start over.
Right.
So I went to my present. I talked to a bunch of agents, but I went to the last person I talked to was the agent I wound up going with, Denise Shannon. Yeah. And I explained to her, she had already read the previous novel, and she said, "This has big problems with it, and I'm not really sure what to tell you. But what else are you working on?" And I said, "Well, I have this crazy other idea that I like written 20 pages of, and I have to explain which was this." And I explained it to her. Yeah. And she said, "That sounds fantastic. You have to work on this. When can you show me more pages of it?" Yeah. And so it was her encouragement and my feeling that like I need to start over. Right. You know, it was like this window opening, and I just said, I'm going to go through it no matter what. And even knowing all the, you know, having been warned, having been, having been shooed away from this.
And so when you wrote this, like what was, because even like the first book you did, it was still this thing about identity and exploration. Yeah. But it seems more here that the gaze was turned inward instead of outward. And so what for you shifted that gaze?
I think a big part of it was the fact that it was a novel and not a book of stories. So I knew I had to go way inward, and also, you know, this is it's a kind of a fantastic premise, but it's a very autobiographical book.
In what ways? Because I had never.
The autobiographical aspect has to do with Baltimore and me being a teenager in Baltimore, and those sections of the book are really taken from my own experience.
Okay.
And it's the Martin character, the character who transforms himself surgically into a black man, is sort of a composite of friends of mine I had at that time who were really into hip hop.
These are white friends.
White friends.
Okay.
Who were really into hip hop, really into black culture.
Yeah.
And they were really, that like me, they were kind of just like floating people. They were people who were, they were kids whose lives could have gone in many different directions. Mm-hmm. There was a real sense of like indeterminacy at that moment. This is in the early 90s. And these are people who also, like, I went off to college and I didn't see them for a long time. So that was the like really autobiographical core of the book that really drove me. Mm-hmm. To go deep about my own psychology. Yeah. At that time.
And so with the plot line, what in the plot line did you feel like? What do you think the plotline gave this exploration?
The plotline, gave it a sense of urgency.
Okay.
And gave it a sense of like, this is happening now, this is happening in the moment, this is happening in 2014.
Right. Okay.
Well, I was going to say, like, it was happening in 2014 or 2013. It's supposed to be contemporary with the year that the novel comes out. But of course, it couldn't happen any later than that. Because, the moment that the book was published was also the moment of Ferguson. And the world really changed and the culture really changed.
In terms of, like, how? What do you feel?
Well, I think the conversation about after the emergence of the protest movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that the conversation would have had to shift more to those conflicts that were going on in the streets in the present. Like, if I had been writing the book 2 years later, I would have had to deal with that material in some ways. And then, it was only 8 months later that Rachel Dolezal came into the book.
That was fun.
Yeah.
And, one of the things, and it took, I don't know how to pronounce the woman's name. I don't want to mispronounce it. But she did an essay, a profile on Rachel Dolezal for The Believer. And basically the essay had essentially boiled down to, there's nothing to see here. It's just another white woman doing what she wants to do. In terms of like Rachel Dolezal, because everyone had been...
The Believer or The Stranger? Because I read a piece in The Stranger.
It might have been The Stranger.
Yeah, this is when Rachel Dolezal's book came out.
Yeah. And, it's The Stranger. I think Ijomo Oluo. Mm-hmm. I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, but the piece itself is the heart of whiteness, and the whole idea of like just basically taking this person.
It's very funny, the heart of darkness.
Yeah, so like trying to treat like her like this is a legitimate thing, like she really thinks that she's black. Yeah, and it's like when you really question her about her blackness, like DK blackness, there's nothing really there, right? Like there's no depth there. Yeah. So. Yeah. And then what she tries, and what Rachel Dolezal constantly, when she's asked questions about, a serious question about blackness, she pivots, she diverts, she goes, well, what is blackness, right? Right. First, you have this very concrete ideal of what you are. Mm-hmm. And it's something that you're not. And then when I ask you what this thing is to you, you're going, well, what is it? So it's like, there's this very ironic use of the identity, right? And so with her, like, she was in... Like, even explain, like, the fact that I'm even here talking to this woman about this is a testament of the power that, like, white people have in this culture. Where we have to take the claims of white people, whether they be fantastical or real, seriously, regardless. Right? And I think if you you've seen Atlanta, that episode where, like, you have the black dude that was a 35-year-old white man. Yeah. And just, like, how, like, the comedy of it, but just, like...
I almost wanted a producer credit for that.
But, like, just the absurdity of how, like, he's obviously not white. So, like, there's a comedy that could play itself out where it's like, of course this is absurd. Right. But, like, you have the abs, like, this is equally absurd. And we're like, well, maybe we're going to create a, transracialism, which by definition, I looked it up and it was like, transracialism is by definition when a family adopts a kid from another
right.
race.
That's the
word. That's been the working definition of it. So it's like, to legitimize this very false claim, is like an essential notion of white power.
There's, I was just reading this piece this week by George Yancey, who's an African American philosopher who's written a lot of great books about whiteness. That's really the focus of his career, is studying race, but also studying whiteness in particular as a black man. And he says this thing he says that whiteness will survive the diversity movement. It will survive ethnographic display. But it will also survive the fragmentation of the postmodern subject. It'll survive the pastiche of the postmodern subject. So when Rachel Dolezal is saying, like, well, what is whiteness? What is blackness? Essentially what she's saying, she's gesturing to this kind of postmodern argument about, well, what is identity? What does identity really mean? It's all constructed, blah, blah, blah. And what Yancey is saying is, okay, that's fine. Identity is constructed. Race is absolutely constructed. It has no biological basis. But if your argument always reduces to, well, race is just constructed, so why does it matter anyway? Anybody can be anything they want.
Right.
What Yancey is saying is whiteness will survive that. Whiteness, that is not a strategy for getting rid of white supremacy or white power. Because what he says is, as long as whiteness is rewarded by the forces of capital, it will remain in control.
Absolutely.
No matter how fragmented, no matter how pastiche, no matter how stylized, it might become.
And then the one thing about also whiteness is, and you say this in the book, is like, all right, if all these things are constructed, why pick it?
Yeah.
Like, why pick anything then?
Right.
Like, why not pick clear?
Right.
Like, why not just be raceless? Right? Like, if the gender, like, not gender, but like, if these sorts of things put you in a deeper trap, why not avoid the trap altogether?
Yeah.
Right? So it becomes this thing to the effect of what you're saying. These choices speak a lot to the power. And one of the things you say about the book about
choices are always made in relation to power.
Yeah.
Structures.
Yeah.
Power arrangements.
So in the book you talk about whiteness as something that, like, I don't know if, like, the actual quote, I don't like misquoting, but you said something about basically like whiteness is sort of like it takes away, whereas like blackness was seen as something that like added, like whiteness was something that like sort of taken away about that. So for you in your own personal life, is this something that you felt was true for your life, or this is something that was just like an observation of whiteness as it pertained to other bodies?
No, it was definitely something that was...
Let me read, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So right here in 246, it says, whiteness is tricky too, Look what happened to Michael Jackson, of course. Of course, I mean, his methods were crude, but no matter what, it's always about taking something away. And you italicize that word away. And so it's very interesting when we talk about, I think, blackness, brownness, like everything else, in pursuit of whiteness, you see what gets taken away, right? The very dramatic thing of like Sammy Sosa, like just not even having skin color, right? Michael Jackson changing his features. But with white people, the assumption is there's nothing there to begin with. So that's taking away doesn't exist in the same ways. Yeah,
that quote directly came from my experience of talking to plastic surgeons. And one of the first things that a New York plastic surgeon said to me was, it's always easier with plastic surgery to take things away than it is to add things.
Oh,
right?
shit.
And one of the reasons why the classical kind of Roman classical figure of whiteness is used as a standard of beauty in plastic surgery is because for almost all people that involves like shaving off things. Ooh. As opposed to, because the question I was asking was like if a white person, if a typically white appearing person wanted to have African American features, what would that mean? One of the things it would mean would be creating a different kind of nose.
And that means adding.
It means adding.
Right.
And he said it's not impossible, but it's much trickier, and it's never. He said it's never been done. Then I talked to plastic surgeons in Thailand who were much more sort of like, well, we can do almost anything. We were much more flexible about it. And it can be done because if you look at like genital reconstruction or genital surgery, there you're like in gender reassignment surgery, there you are creating new body parts.
Yeah.
So that for me, like there was always this sense when I was growing up.
Yeah.
That normal, regular Americanness was whiteness.
Right.
And that there was really a sense in which it was an absent center. It was like an absent... There was this real sense for me of like, because my parents were liberal, educated professionals who had moved around a lot.
Right.
And didn't have a lot of a sense of particular rootedness. So there wasn't like really a deep sense of like, what are the foods of our family, for example?
Yeah.
Or like, what are the, like traditions or memories or customs of our family?
Right.
It was mostly absence. There was not a lot to like, cling to.
Bill Burr said that. Like, he was into the stand-up a lot of years ago. Mad years ago. I'm going to stick to my colloquialism. He was talking about being on a train one day in New York, and he was like, the train doors had closed on this black dude, and he was like, "You're not gonna open the doors?" He's like, "I bet you he was like one of these crack ass motherfuckers." And he kept pointing at like him, and he was like, the other white guys on the train were kind of like, "I don't have anything to do with that. I'm here and here." And he was like, "There's no we with white people. Like, like you fight a black guy, even if the guy's winning, like the whole neighborhood comes out and becomes a group effort. With white people, it's very like individual, like by themselves, isolated."
Yeah. And
I just think about that in terms of like looking at that in regards to like a Charlottesville, when in those moments when the white individual decides to become unified, and what that unification looks like, or what it has looked like, versus where it's like, and then any other day
it looks ugly, but also pathetic and funny,
right?
Awkward,
right? And that's what makes it scary.
Like you order the tiki torches from
like everyone's in line buying the tiki torch.
Yeah, and the same white, the same white shirts and khaki.
Like they planned that.
Like they're all like middle managers from Dunder Mifflin.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that to me. Like that was the picture of the white supremacist movement they were trying to create was something like, we are a class of like middle managers who are all going to be like displaced, who are all going to be replaced,
right?
Because we're all just cogs in a wheel anyway. Because we're all interchangeable.
And what's funny is that the cogs in the wheel have more problem with the pavement that it rolls on than the person driving the vehicle. Mm-hmm. Meaning that middle managers will blame lower employees for their position than the higher ups. Right. Who they identify with, who they think who they think is their friend. Yeah, and it's like you really think that you're I pose a threat to your power.
It's like a middle manager feels threatened by illegal immigrant from Puebla who is coming to pick lettuce and doesn't and isn't literate in it.
Meanwhile, this dude just took your job and outsourced it. And you're like, it's because of them that it's outsourced. Like, well, why is where is that man who decided
or your benefits and your salary and everything about your position has been systematically chipped away through 50 years of anti-union legislation.
Right.
You have a job that 50 years ago would have been unionized, and now you're contingent employee.
Yeah, and you're mad.
And they're not
at somebody else.
Yes, this is that part is a pure the Bannon part is a pure, it's taken straight from the playbook of the Nazis and Italian fascism and populist movements of all kinds. It's the same.
Yeah.
That part is the same playbook. I mean, he was in Alabama this week, running around the stage, saying supporting Roy Moore, who's this sort of Christian fascist candidate, the one who won. Saying get this guy, elect this guy, and screw the elites, And Steve Bannon is like paid for by this billionaire, Robert Mercer. He's just a henchman of a billionaire. And he's saying, screw the elite. You know, he's telling these people, his narrative is screw the elites.
Damn. That's real. And like people believe that though.
Roy Moore got elected. It worked.
Yeah.
You know, Breitbart works.
Yeah. And I think,
at least,
but how much of that rhetoric is predicated on denial, right? Like how much of it operates on the basic emotional logic of denying things. Like rich people who I speak to enough to learn that like they don't see themselves as rich. They're comfortable.
Right.
They're okay. Like it's always to like, it is not what it looks like.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're all right. I'm like, y'all, okay.
Yeah.
So.
No, denial is, denial is ubiquitous, you know. It's the engine of American capitalism.
You're right.
American consumption.
So you brought a book with you.
Uh-huh.
I'm assuming this is the first book that brought some life to you. What's the book?
So this is...
Give me a passage.
It isn't... I wouldn't say this is the first book because I had a really hard time figuring out the first book. But this is a book. It's called First Love and Other Sorrows. And this is a book that I found in a used bookstore when I was in college in New Haven.
What school you went to?
And Yale. And
okay. I like how you said that shit like it was just like, I went to McDonald's.
I'm sorry, it's a reflex to say I went to college in New Haven. I'm sorry, but you know.
Well, is that a purposeful thing? Like you don't want to say
It's a thing.
Like why? That's a part of the denial.
Because of what you just said. Because of denial. It's a form of denial. It's a form of like denial and like displacing your privilege.
Yeah. Hey.
That's what it is. It's a habit. You know, it is.
Okay.
All right. So this book was published in the 1950s, and Harold Brodsky was considered this child genius, and then he didn't publish another book until the 80s. He published this book when he was in his 20s, and then he was like this major New York literary figure, and people kept saying like, when's his next book going to come out? And he was working on this novel for like 40 years. And he finally published it, and it was kind of a bust, actually. But then he published a lot of other stuff. Brodsky is a really fascinating writer because he had this very long period where he didn't publish anything, but then he published this novel, which was this huge sort of messy book, but he published another book of stories called Stories in an Almost Classical Mode, which is an amazing, mind-blowing book of stories. Then he was diagnosed with HIV, and he died in the early. He had been married for a long time, but he was bisexual. He had lots of affairs with men in the 70s. He was diagnosed with HIV in the early 90s. He wrote an amazing book called This Wild Darkness about being diagnosed, about having AIDS. And then he died a year later in like 91 or 92.
Jeez.
And he has a beautiful book of stories that came out after he died called The World is the Home of Love and Death. And another book of essays. So he had this career where like published one book, was totally inactive for 40 years. Not totally inactive, but didn't publish another book. Then had this huge burst of creativity and then tragically died. Damn. In the middle of it.
That's crazy.
But anyway, so I'm just going to read is it okay if I read?
Yeah.
So this is the first, I think the first story ever published is the first story in the book. It's called The State of Grace. And this is one paragraph that I totally fell in love with at the time. And it really gave me this intense desire to want to do what Harold Brodsky was doing.
All right.
So the story is called The State of Grace. There's a certain shade of red brick, a dark, almost melodious red, somber and riddled with blue, that is my childhood in St. Louis. Not the real childhood, but the false one that extends from the dawning of consciousness until the day that one leaves home for college. That one shade of red brick and green foliage is St. Louis in the summer. The winter is just a gray sky and a crowded school bus and the wet footprints on the brown linoleum floor at school. And that brick and a pale sky is spring. It's also loneliness. It's also loneliness and the queer self-pitying wonder that children whose families are having catastrophes feel.
I like that. That's good.
Just like a perfect.
So you preface that with saying the thing that he did that made you what was the thing you felt like he did that you wanted to like not copy but like follow?
Yeah.
In pursuit.
There's this total sense of confidence and authority.
Mm-hmm.
Like what I'm saying, there's a certain shade of brick that is my whole childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's a metonymy, the part standing in for the whole. It is total authority and belief in that, in that assertion, that he can sum up his world that way.
Yeah,
and it's just that the assertion, and then the way that it grows out, and it becomes about this queer pitying feeling. So it's not just like a color that reminds me of childhood, but it reminds me of this queer pitying feeling that children whose families are having catastrophes feel.
Right.
So it's a sense of like, it reminds me of this feeling of this, this complicated feeling.
Yeah. Of
self-pity and of instability, not knowing what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Wounded pride, wounded dignity, and that's what the story is about. It's a story that's about coming from a family with a lot of wealth, and then his father dies, and the family is impoverished.
Damn.
And so they like live in a nice house, but then the father dies, and they have to move into this like apartment that's it's not a shitty apartment, but it's like it's a step down in the world.
Yeah.
And it's that the way that he was able to distill all that into a paragraph.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that made me a short story writer, because it's like a string quartet or like a really good pop song.
Yeah.
It distills a lot of complexity into a tiny, tiny space.
Ooh, I like that. We've had a lot of language on poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Never had language on what makes a short story a short story.
Yeah, well, the short story is all about compression in the same way that poems are about compression. But the thing is, with a short story, what you're compressing is, to a certain degree, what you're compressing is time and experience. So there has to be some feeling of like time going on. With poems, lyric poem doesn't have to have any feeling of time going on at all, because it's just like reflection in the moment. But a story has to have some sense of like time passing, events happening, but it has to be brought within this kind of orb. It has to feel like it, like the beginning exactly matches the end.
Ooh.
And so that's in some sense, like, that's why it's like a pop song, because a pop song has to end in a way where it feels like you want to go right back and listen to the song again. Like a loop. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, speaking of loops, and I was looking, I think I'd like to have you read this before you head out, but it's one of the recordings that Kelly listens to of Martin before his transition. It was the one about language. And I think this is it's like a good length, and I think it has a good body to it. Okay. It feels in itself like a short story.
Okay, so where do you want me to stop?
You read that. That's
the whole thing?
Yeah, that's enough.
Chapter 18?
That's good. That's good.
Sounds good.
All right.
I haven't read this in a long time. Recording number 3. Source Sony cassette tape, 90 minutes, condition plus, which means good. Labeled side 1, tape 3, private, do not destroy. When did I first know I was white? Not at Shabazz. No, sir. Of course I knew I was the color white. I knew I was a black. I knew I wasn't Mexican or Korean or Puerto Rican. But when did I know I was white as a thing in itself, as something to be? At Roland Park, at Willow. At Roland Park, at Willow, where there were other white people. The funny thing is, it was all a little artificial at first. I had to be told. When I arrived at RP, I spoke effectively black English. Not consciously, not at home, but I had a school vocabulary. I addressed the teachers as they expected to be addressed. Where Darnell at? He on the jungle gym, Miss Dixon. It's just idiom after all. Any child can pick it up. And at Shabazz, no one thought it was funny. Nobody thought I was funny. Sad, maybe, a little, but not funny. But at Roland Park, the teachers were in a panic. The second or third day, I'll never forget this, they had a meeting with me, my teacher, the principal, Dad, of course, and a speech pathologist. Martin, Mrs. Richards said, that was my teacher, it's not wrong to speak that way if you want. It's not hurting anybody. But there's such a thing as standard English, and that's what we speak at this school. We don't want you to be uncomfortable here. I'm not uncomfortable, I said. And we don't want you to make anyone else uncomfortable, without meaning to. Ashante, for example. You like Ashante, right? Didn't she share her cupcake with you at lunch? You don't want her to think you're making fun of her. That's when I started to cry. What was I supposed to think? And Dad, I looked over at Dad, and he was just kind of puzzled and amused. Don't worry, he said. You want your little chameleon to change colors. He'll change soon enough. They didn't think that was funny either. But you know who really took offense after all that fuss? Malik Williams. Remember him? His son was in my class. The Sun columnist. The first black columnist they hired, though he lasted all of 5 minutes. He was an old-school firebrand, an Al Sharpton wannabe, with a big head of dreadlocks and a beard, scary Rasta style, though he was local, West Side through and through. He was fired in a plagiarism scandal, accused of stealing copy from some other columnist in Atlanta. Of course, he sued and lost. Major news in Baltimore in the mid-'80s. In any case, his son Stokely came home and told him that there was a white kid at Roland Park trying to talk like a brother, and he just hit the roof. Demanded a meeting with the principal, wanted to meet with Dad, too. He called it cross-racial experimentation. Wrote a column about it, too. What kind of perverse linguistic experiment is going on at Roland Park Elementary School? Why are they teaching white children to speak pidgin black English? And Stokely, God, Stokely was such a nice kid. He was really caught in the middle. He even said to me, Dad told me I should give you a beatdown. He was the tiniest kid in the class. Couldn't have beat me in arm wrestling. But it worked. After that, I shut up. Stopped talking in class altogether. No one said anything about it. I think they were relieved. Took me almost an entire year, most of 3rd grade, and then when I opened my mouth again, I was white. Dad was right. I hardly remembered being in Shabazz. To spare myself from having to explain it, I used to tell people I'd been at RP since kindergarten, and hardly anyone ever questioned me about it. I mean, I was happy, wasn't I? You know what it's like there. It's a good school. A little island of happiness with a well-fortified PTA. Those jungle gyms get repainted every year, and that library has story time in 3 different languages. They don't sell off the new textbooks and use the old ones at RP. I'd send my kids there in a heartbeat. Those were the happiest years of my life, you could say, once I settled in, so to speak, 3rd grade up until middle school. Well, it's a latency period, isn't it? In more ways than one. Transsexuals, you know, they say the same thing. Prepubescent children are allowed to be androgynous to a degree. They can play at cross-dressing. They can engage in all kinds of imaginative fooling around. Or in some cases, they can just be nothing, ungendered, sexless, curveless, living only in their heads. That must have been me. Once I knew I was white, once I was told, once I was reminded, I just sort of relaxed into being nothing at all. I spent no time outside in the neighborhood. None at all. If I played outside of school, it was at friends' houses or on Roland Avenue. For a few years, I spent every afternoon till 5 at the Roland Park Library, across the street from school. Dad picked me up there. And then when I was a little older, I started taking the bus down to Hopkins to meet him on campus. That was a pretty genteel existence, comparatively speaking. Roland Park blots out the rest of the world pretty damn well. And then I went on to Willow. There was no option, really, after that. Dad wanted me to go to Northern Middle, but the guidance counselor at Roland Park had some kind of private meeting with him and convinced him that he didn't want a dead son. What was allowable, what might slip under the radar at Shabazz, was not to be tolerated after grammar school. Thus our apartheid system proceeds. So I was set up with the SSAT and went on interviews, all kinds of aptitude tests, and Willow was the one that wanted me. I'll never forget the first time Dad took me out there. It was in April, early April, just this time of year. Trees bare, chilly, rainy. We came up the driveway, past the horse barn, past the pasture, the lacrosse field, the other lacrosse field. Rounded the top of the hill, saw the lake, the theater, and the trees all around, trees that seemed unending in every direction. I mean, talk about a brand. Talk about impact. The Willow School, as in, you are going to school in the Enchanted Forest. And that was before I even saw the swans. Who goes to a school with swans? People call it a country club. It's not a country club. It's a sacred grove. How can you not feel special? How can you not feel like elected to be there? Up to that point, believe me, I'd worked hard, so hard. at being average. I followed football, baseball, and basketball. It drove Dad crazy. I listened to Z100. Whatever the big movie was, I wanted to go. After Top Gun, I had the little bomber jacket and the aviator glasses. Frankly, I would have been happiest in the suburbs. I had a friend, Carl, whose dad lived out in Owings Mills. I had a sleepover there once. Typical ranch house, basketball hoop in the driveway. We played in the sprinklers and went to Chuck E. Cheese for dinner. I thought that was paradise. So you see, Willow was a shock. Whatever it is, it wasn't normal. Look down the hall. You've got the pimply 8th graders hunched over their magic cards. You've got Sheila Puckner practicing her Ophelia monologue. Dr. Kendricks arguing with Jason Kornbluth about the second law of thermodynamics. You've got kids learning to play epistrophe on the xylophone, and kids sneaking out into the woods to smoke clove cigarettes. God, I hated it at first. I'd worked so hard not to be a freak, and here I practically had to be one.
I like that. I think that's a really
that
good
was
chapter.
fun.
That was a good chapter.
I haven't seen that passage in a long time.
And you read it and you read it with that life that really gives it a body.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Man, this is really good. So, usually this is the point of the show where I bless you with the lit pen.
Oh, look at
That's
this
yours.
thing.
Yeah.
Look at this thing.
That's yours.
I really feel like I'm in the WWF.
Your name is on the box, so you know it's yours.
Wow.
We personalize things here.
Wow.
So, what you have any events coming up? I know you're on sabbatical from teaching.
I am.
You teach at NYU.
Well, I teach at the College of New Jersey.
College of New Jersey,
So
but you
last
live
year
right
I was
away.
teaching at NYU,
Yeah.
and I live in NYU housing.
You're on a fellowship right now.
I'm on I have a Guggenheim Fellowship right now.
Explain to people who see that, who don't know, what is a Guggenheim?
Yeah. Gonna have to put that on later. This is so great. So the Guggenheim Fellowship is one of the main fellowships that writers get when they're at the stage in their career where they published a couple of books and they've achieved some success. It's called a mid-career fellowship, which
Right.
means you've gotten a certain amount of success. The Guggenheim Foundation thinks that you're a promising, writer with a good career underway, and they want to give you some money for a work in progress. So basically, it allows you to have time when you're not working, when you're not teaching or doing anything
Now
else.
translate that into dollar value.
$50,000.
There you go.
That's how
so
much.
people,
I think that's actually the average.
and this is before taxes.
Unfortunately, it's before taxes, and you do have to pay taxes on it. So it actually works out to not that much money.
So what is it?
In the sense that
what does it work
if you
out
actually
to?
want to support yourself.
Yeah. So if from 50 it goes down to 40.
It depends on your tax bracket.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
Well, in the spirit of denying people's economic standards, I'm not gonna ask you which tax bracket it is.
Well, I don't actually know. There's another kind of denial. My wife does our taxes.
All right. So, any events coming up?
Yeah, so I'm reading in Amherst, Massachusetts on Monday. That's October 2nd.
Okay.
Amherst Books, 8 o'clock. In case there's anyone out there who lives in the Happy Valley, the Pioneer Valley.
The Happy Valley.
That's what they call it.
What else?
And after that, the only other thing I'm really doing in the fall is I am going to be participating in this amazing conference called Thinking Its Presence, which is a conference on race and creative writing. I'm doing a couple of events there.
Yeah.
I'm doing a onstage conversation with a novelist named Julie Iramwanya, who had published an amazing novel that came out a couple of years ago called Mr. and Mrs. Doctor. And we're going to be talking about writing about race with a sense of humor. Always a difficult, tricky subject. But that's what we're going to be talking about. So that's if you're in Tucson, Arizona, October 17th through 19th.
Cool.
And other than that, I am hunched down at my desk.
Working on what?
Away,
You want to share with the people what you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm working on a book of essays that is in some ways a continuation of Your Face and Mine. It's about race in the American imagination. It's called White Flights. It's going to be published by Grey Wolf, most likely in early 2019.
Ooh.
Which is not that far away.
But come on. People need to know these books before they drop so they can have it.
That's right. So that's my next book is White Flights, and then I'm working on another novel that'll come out sometime after that called The New Earth. Yeah.
Is it a post-apocalyptic wasteland where people wear Yeezys?
No.
Okay.
No. It's actually it's weirdly it's set in 2014, so it's like before. It's like a pre-Trump novel. It's like
you
it starts
stop
in
talking
New
as
York.
pre-Trump, like America ain't all Trump. Like,
Well, that's the thing, you know. Well, exactly. It's like that, but you know, it's about
like he marked some sort of line in history. Like I don't like.
Well, I mean, I think he did, but all of the forces that were, you know, around to make him what he was were already in
They
place.
converged.
Yeah,
Feel like a child of the century type situation.
Yeah, pre-convergence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where can people follow you if they want to keep in touch with the brilliance?
Facebook, and my website is jessrow.com.
Yeah. What else? That's it.
And that's it.
That's
I'm off Twitter for the moment because there was a lot of threats from white supremacists last year when I published a piece in the New Republic called "What Are White Writers For?" And that you know, they got a lot of people upset. You know, people on the what is it, Pepe the Frog side of things.
Okay.
You know, the alt-right.
You gotta stay low.
Yeah. So I want to get back on Twitter. But I have a hard time keeping up. I'm on Instagram too, but I hardly ever. I can do one platform at a time because that's the demographic that I'm in. I'm in the Facebook demographic.
Yeah,
it's like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat.
You do Snapchat?
No, that's the thing. That Snapchat. Is
I wonder what a writer's Snapchat will look like. Like if I followed a writer on Snapchat, like what would their Snapchat?
Aren't there any? Must be the younger.
The younger writers.
The younger writers.
Yeah. Literary swag before you get out of here.
Literary swag. Yeah.
Before you get out of here.
Yeah.
Your 3 writers.
My 3 writers.
And your 3 clothing designers.
Yeah. You know, you did this with me. Like,
is it the same?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would say like definitely in terms of clothing designers, like
pull up the.
You know,
I remember it was
Uniqlo. Uniqlo, Muji.
See, I wasn't one of them last time.
Yeah, and I would say Kevin.
All right.
You know, I love
Team Sanchez. All right.
I love Kevin's stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
City of No Fucks.
All right, and then
the writers.
Yeah.
James Baldwin.
Okay.
I would say James Baldwin, Nadine Gordimer.
That wasn't on there first.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's always
it changed. That's why you asked the question.
James Baldwin, Nadine Gordimer, and if I had to pick one, I would say, this is always like James Baldwin, Nadine Gordimer, Maxine Hong Kingston.
Okay. So this has been another episode of Lit. Make sure you follow my man Jess Row. Be on the lookout for this new book, White Flight 2019. This has been another Liddy Fontaine, Pink Pig Productions. Follow the Pink Pig production team at Pink Pig Pro. Follow me at Yadon. Follow the show at Lit Platform. And follow my man Cyril Jules, who's playing the music that keeps this show super lit. We out there.